Hi guys, I'm Ryan O'Rourke and welcome back to another video. Today I'd like to show you guys how to paint trees. So, tip number 1. When we generally paint a tree, what color comes to mind? Generally I find with most people it's brown and it's an immediate thought. However, when you paint a tree or when you go up and you really examine a tree, very rarely is it ever just a brown. It's more of a gray brown or it has a lot of green in it, and the color is actually very much affected by the sky and the time of day. So I would definitely not advise going in with just a strict brown. Branches are actually fairly complicated, and there are a number of things we need to take into account when painting them. The first being that branches aren't always pointed upwards. They go back and they make odd shapes, and they're very organic. They are not a structurally man-made thing where everything goes vertically and on a certain angle. No, it's much more random, and it needs to be painted that way as well if you are looking for a realistic effect. Secondly, we need to take into account lighting, meaning that one side is always going to be brighter or darker than the other. So everything's going to kind of look like miniature organic cylinders. You don't want them to be perfectly straight or smooth cylinders because you do want it to remain organic and like a tree. So you want it to be kind of like rough little cylinders as far as the light is involved. Also, we need to remember that branches do overlap, and when they overlap they actually cast shadows upon each other. So that's another thing to remember, provided your tree is large enough that painting in the shadows will actually be seen. I'd also like to reference another painting video I've done, specifically on branches. Now, it's a long video, it's about 6 minutes long as well, and I'm referencing it here because if I were going to re-say all of that, this video would become 15 minutes, and that's a little bit unbearable. I wouldn't want to do that to you guys. So if you'd like me to go more in-depth upon the branches, go and click this other video, and I hope that helps as well. This video is going to be more centered around the basics and the leaves. So to begin on the tree, I generally advise going in with the darkest color first, because what we're going to do, we're going to add a dark color first, and then we're going to add a middle color over that, and then the brightest color on top. And we're going to leave remnants of each as we add our layers. However, the back is still going to shine through, especially on the part where the light isn't hitting it. So I would like to advise you to put down the darkest layer first. Now, in the example that I'm using here, I'm actually using just a regular black. However, I wouldn't advise that. I would actually advise mixing a very dark brown, because black really doesn't have much of a depth to it as a color. So if you can create your own very dark color, that would definitely be advised. So in terms of applying the paint, I would definitely advise you to apply it in a very rough nature. Because when you look at a tree, it is very rarely a very soft thing. It's rough and it has its textures, it's not smooth. So I would highly advise using a tapping effect with your brush and using less water. This will make sure that everything doesn't blend really smoothly and it doesn't look like just a straight color or line. It'll show that it has texture and volume instead. As I previously mentioned, we are putting down the darkest color first, and then we are going in with a lighter layer over top of that. We are leaving part of the dark layer showing on the side where the light isn't hitting it. And in my example at this point, the light is going forward. So both sides of it are going to be a little bit darker. I would advise putting your second layer in with the same color as your initial dark layer, however adding a little bit white or taking out a little bit of the black. So you're using the same colors and you're just kind of building on top of it to add volume. So again, when doing the moss, I'm handling it much like I handled the tree. I'm looking to create a volume, so I'm going in with the darkest color I have, which is a very dark green, or again in my case, a black. From there, I'm adding in a lighter green over top of that, still leaving in some of the black from behind, and then I'm going to do another brighter layer over top of this. I'm doing all of this in a tapping effect with a fairly dry brush, so again it doesn't look smooth, it looks more rugged and organic. It shouldn't look systematic, it should look fairly random. Now my moss is green and yellow, however, if the lighting in your painting suggests it should be something else, please do adapt it to the atmosphere. Just because in a blue sky it's going to look green and yellow doesn't mean that it's always going to look that way. Now for the second coat on the leaves, I'm going in with my darkest color and I'm making sure it is fully opaque so you cannot see through it at all. I'm putting this fairly close to my initial layer, but I'm still leaving some of that initial layer showing through. And this is going to be the back of all of the leaves that we are going to paint, because much like the moss and the trees, we're just building layers. We are adding colors on top of colors, so we will probably have 2 more coats on top of this, one being an average or dark green and the other being a light green. And we will not be adding any detail to this. It is simply, again, to imply where leaves will go. So to begin on my third layer on the leaves, I'm going to use a green, which will probably be a little bit dark. It's not going to be anywhere near the shade of dark that my first layer was, however, it's going to be fairly subdued. So what I'd advise here is, again, we are going to use a minimal amount of paint and we are going to tap on the green. Now the idea here is that, again, we want to imply leaves. We don't want to actually have to paint all of these leaves. So we are simply going to give the impression, make it a little bit messy, and add it over top the majority of the black layer that you did. But remember, as we did before, we are going to leave some of that black showing for volume's sake. So we finally reached the top layer of leaves. And to begin this layer, we are going to start off with a very light green. Or if you are working with reds, then a very light red. And in this layer, we are going to start by tapping as we have through all of the other layers. We are again just implying leaves, letting the first, second, and third layer still show through a little bit for the depth. However, in this one, after we've done that, we're going to go in with even a tiny bit of a lighter green and a very small brush. And here we're actually going to paint in a bunch of tiny little leaves. Now we're not going to do it everywhere. We don't want it to completely consume it because that much detail in that small area can be kind of awkward for our eyes to look at. So what I'd advise is pick a couple key areas that you'd really like to accentuate or highlight and go in and paint in very small little leaves. This can generally be done simply by a little tap, drag, and pull up with the brush. So it's a very simple process and you are only doing it for a number of leaves, so it's not completely time consuming as well. So as we can see, what should be finished product of mine here looks fairly bare. I feel like there are too many holes and there aren't enough leaves. Now this is a result of me not putting in enough black at the beginning, and so it kind of looks like a tree that's simply blooming in spring, and I don't want that. What I want is a fully grown tree. So what I'm going to do is something I highly advocate. If you do something and you're not entirely happy with it, go in and do it again. So that's what I did. I put black over the majority of it again, and this time filling out much more space than I had initially, and I just decided to go through those same layering processes that I did initially. This time I simply expanded the black, expanded the second layer and the third layer, and I didn't do as much detail work with the third layer simply because I found in the way I was tapping the strokes with the brush, it just worked. And you get lucky sometimes. However, if you do want to add a little bit more detail and dimension and imply more leaves, then you can always go in with a smaller brush and do that. I also changed the way the lighting was going because I wasn't entirely happy with it, so instead now the light comes from the right as opposed to forward. So that is essentially the basics on how to paint a tree. Again, if you'd like more information on branches, you can click my other video, and I really hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that helped, and if you have any questions at all, I highly advise you to leave a comment in the comment box, or if you need a more urgent reply, you can like my Facebook page in the description and message me there, because I'm on there much more frequently than I'm on YouTube. So if you would like immediate attention or a critique of what you're doing, please feel free to send me a message. I'd be more than happy to help. And by the way, I do these painting tutorials weekly. I will have a new video for you guys next week. So please join this little art community. Thank you guys for watching and take care.